I've been browsing, treading water that they drowning. My head on a swivel, yeah. It's only really my surroundings.
Hello and welcome to episode 243 of the Smash Accept podcast. I'm your host, Michael Royer. You can find me on Twitter at DynastyDadFF. We got a fun show for you. We just wrapped up episode 242 where we were, breaking up the wide receivers that have been traded the most in Dynasty over the last 7 days. Today, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about wide receiver building blocks, those guys that you can get for, a mid-second or later, those guys that go round 10 or later in your startups, how we're, viewing those guys both from a rebuilding and from a contending standpoint, and how you should use those guys to tier up or to tier into, more competitive nature. Nobody better to chop that up with him. My main man Snoog rocking the polo today for you YouTube guys. He's spicing it up a little bit.
Yeah, we got two pink polos on. We're ready to go, man. Building blocks, so I'm excited. I love talking wide receivers almost as much as I like to talk running backs, but I'm excited to kind of dive into this because you see breakout wide receivers year after year in that mid, like after wide receiver 30 to like that 50 range. I mean, we saw it with Debo back there in 2021, Mike Williams in that 2021 season. We saw it last year with like Puka. We saw it with Amon-Ra. Like, we're always getting these crazy breakouts that come from that range. So we're going to kind of help you guys figure out who these guys are, who these building blocks are that you can get to kind of hit on those guys and then work your way up into the Jalen Waddles, Devontae Smiths, Chris Olaves, Brandon Ayuk. So I'm super excited for this show. It's going to be a good one.
And the Patreon has a bet out there. It's going at 15-1 odds that Snoog will mention a running back, even if it's in a quarterback show or wide receiver show. Big way to make money. No, seriously. I love
10,000.
Patreon guys are honestly like talking shop 24/7 during the live stream. They're adding questions in there on YouTube. You guys make sure you guys hit that subscribe button. Help us get to our goal of 1,000. We're almost there. Just hit that button, smash subscribe, and we have bonus content out there. That we're getting week in and week out. So today's show, what I really wanted to hone in on, I've been talking about the rebuild process. That podcast has actually been our most viewed podcast that we've put out on YouTube. You guys are you guys want to just see us. I know we look good, but now we got the polos going, and everybody was like, they watched it from start to finish. And that's always one of our big things is that rebuild process, because this time of year you're trying to figure that out. Now we're talking startups. I want to talk about building blocks. For me, these are guys that I think have a very, very good chance to increase in value. I would say, from rounds 10 to 15, I'm going to list 8 guys, and I think these 8 guys have a 75% chance or better to rise in value. And the important part to look at these guys is when you're drafting these particular wide receivers, you're taking these guys in round 10. You're taking a guy that you think, 1, is going to increase in value, 2, that you can flip quickly because he's on an offense that's going to score points. And 3, we're ultimately, Snoog, trying to tier to a point where we get to the DJ Moores, the AJ Browns, the Garrett Wilsons, the Rome Odunzes. We want to take these building block wide receivers and turn them into something special. Because, Snoog, out of these 8 guys that we're going to talk about, I don't start any of them. Like, across my, now it's 20 leagues, I don't start a single one of these guys, but I am investing in them, right? It's still good to invest in a Jermain Burton in your rookie draft. It's still good to take a shot on a Khalil Shakir in your startup draft, because these guys have a path to relevance where they can increase in value and push yourselves towards moving to that elite tier. We want as many foundational wide receivers as possible. Snook, how do you go about doing that? Because I've looked at your rosters, you've looked at my rosters. It's a very common theme that we have at least 2 foundational wide receivers, or we have vets that are going to absolutely kill it. And we don't, I look at your team and I don't see teams where you're starting Michael Wilson. I don't see teams where you're starting a Troy Franklin, but you're adding them in because they can increase in value.
Yeah, exactly. I look at it like this. I look at my bench. I want to be filled with young 1 to 2 to 3 year players that are prime for a breakout. Like, you want your Dontavion Wicks, your Jalen Pokes, your Javon Bakers, your Jameson Williams, even like your Adonai Mitchells. Like, you want these guys that have a ton of upside, that if they bust, you're like, whatever, late second, out the roof, right? I'll make it up somewhere else. That's kind of like how I like to build my bench. And I always like to have a couple of those Keenan Allen, Tyler Lockett's, those type of guys. Even maybe have like one, like a Calvin Ridley or D-Hop, just a guy that I know I can rely on if I get an injury to be a plug and play wide receiver too with upside.
You know you're going to get 10 points from Tyler Lockett, but Marvin Mims, you don't know that's going to happen. You know, and these are like more of those lottery tickets for me when I'm doing a startup. And if you look at, you know, some of the ones that I've done recently, and the one I'm doing with David Gutierrez, I took 7 straight running backs from round 13 to 20. Because I think some of these wide receivers could hit, but I want the Gus Edwards because he's going to have an opportunity where he's going to increase in value.
Yeah.
And I want, you know, like all these running backs who I think have a clearer path to relevance. But let's start with these 8 building blocks drafted round 10 or first. The first one, and I'm still shocked that he's going after round 10, it's Dontavion Wicks. You know, I know you've been steering that ship, but I think Dontavion Wicks, right now, Watson's going about round 8, Reed's going round 6, Wicks is going round 10, and then Dobbs is going round 12, 13. You know, Dontavion Wicks, sell me on why we should be buying him, and then I want to talk a little bit after you do that about how we can tier up off him and what kind of scenario we have.
Yeah, I mean, he's the cheapest one, and he's arguably the best one on the team in that receiving room. I mean, he's got the size, the route running ability. There's like a 2-minute clip of him just absolutely stealing ankles and getting wide open. He played in like 14 or 15 games, very, very low snap share, and he was very efficient, like almost 600 yards, 5-6 touchdowns, had a really good end of the stretch of the year. Love seemed to really like to target him, and like Mike LaFleur and that offense and that coaching staff seem to really speak highly on him. I think he has the highest upside if he hits his true ceiling out of all those guys. Like, yeah, you could say Christian Watson because he's such a good athlete. He does not have near the athletic or the like raw ability, breaking people off the line of scrimmage, his release, his route running downfield, intermediate, the hands. Like Christian Watson's just not on that level as Wicks is from that aspect of the game. I think it's going to be the Wicks Reed show. Like, I really think that's what it's going to be until they draft somebody else, if they ever do. But I think, I mean, he's pricing that wide receiver 50s range. You can't go wrong buying a player at that price that flashed that much as a rookie. Everyone just absolutely salivates over Elijah Moore's rookie year. Like, Dontavion Wicks had a year like that. Like, same amount of yards, same touchdowns, like, really good flashes. I think Dontavion Wicks is just being super undervalued. Like, people keep saying, oh, he's being overvalued now. Everyone's talking about him. The market hasn't corrected itself on him.
No,
so
it has not. You and I, we're pounding the drum. He's wide receiver 55 going behind Jahan Dotson, Keenan Allen, Romeo Dobbs. Like, I mean, I'm in.
Some people just ain't built for it. It's just how it is.
They're just not making that correction. When I look at these guys going at the end in that 10th round, I start to look at the difference makers, right? So Dontavion Wicks, like you said, he's a great route runner. I do think, Watson and Reed are better with the ball in their hands for yards after the catch, but Dontavion Wicks is probably the most all-around wide receiver in that room. And then what I want an elite level quarterback with a high scoring offense, right?
Exactly.
Like it's one thing to invest in a building block wide receiver that is in a could be the wide receiver 1 in his offense. That's a horrible offense. We look at Dontavion Wicks in an offense like Green Bay with Jordan Love tied to that scenario. Like with an injury, he becomes a wide receiver 2 right off the bat. And I think he's going to, I would say there is an 85 to 90% chance that he increases in value. Yep. He's a prime candidate for me for an insulated trade, moving off guys that you and I don't love in that late first rookie pick value, like a Michael Pittman, like a, one of those guys where you tear off that area and you get Dontavion Wicks in a first, and Wicks is going to increase in value. This is that time of year where if you're a contender, and you have or if you're a rebuilder and you have Mike Evans and you can get Dontavion Wicks in a second, you do it. If you're a rebuilding team and you're trying to tear off of Joe Mixon, you're trying to, actually, no, running backs is bad. You're trying to tear off a wide receiver that you don't believe in. You're trying to. I think you could trade Keenan Allen straight up for Dontavion Wicks if you're rebuilding, and I feel like that's a win-win scenario where when you get to this area, you start to make some decisions on the direction of your team. Keenan Allen cannot go up in value. DeAndre Hopkins cannot go up in value. Dontavion Wicks could. You flip that on a rebuild, and I see no issues with it at all.
Yeah, exactly. And I love that you mentioned like kind of like what we're looking for to hit on these type of wide receivers is you want the quarterback play. So you're looking for that elite quarterback. You're looking for a good offense, good coaching staff, just somewhere where they can utilize their players to their strengths.
Hmm.
And then you're looking for the talent and the target opportunity. Like, is it a crowded room? Is there a Justin Jefferson and a TJ Hawkinson ahead of him? Or is it Christian Watson, right? Like,
Hmm.
that's what I'm looking for. Dontavion Wicks checks damn near every single box we just talked about. That's why he's a prime breakout candidate. Or just somebody that can gain value. It's not even like, all right, he's going to be a top 12 dynasty wide receiver. But if he puts up 800 to 1,000 yards and a couple touchdowns, he's probably going to be valued in that top 20, top 30 range. And everyone's going to be like, now year 3, he's going to be another step. And that's what you look for, right?
Yeah. And I think you and I have him higher than anybody. I mean, most websites have him in the mid to late 50s. I have him in my 40s. I know you do as well. And I do see a real world scenario. You look at who's above him in the rankings right now. And by the year's end, I mean, Cooper, Godwin, Kirk, Deontay, those guys are all above him. And those are guys that I want because I want to win. But I think there's a real world scenario where he passes some of those guys. And then you look at the uncertain situations of Hollywood Brown and Xavier Legette and Ricky Purcell. And, I think they belong above him right now, but he could jump into that area. He's definitely above the Josh Downs type, I'm looking at other guys like Quentin Johnston, Jamison Williams, I prefer him over those guys. Roman Wilson, Cortland Sutton, Michael Wilson, Jerry Jeudy, and a lot of people value him over those guys. And I'm just looking at who can rise in value. And is there a scenario where Cortland Sutton rises in value at all? No. He just had a phenomenal season, probably where best he can do right now, and you're just not going to pass him. Same with Jerry Jeudy and maybe Jahan Dotson, Curtis Samuel. You kind of go into that area. So
if you look at Josh Downs and Wicks, they have completely different building block situations, right? Like one's in a crowded room with a run first quarterback and a run heavy offense, and one is the absolute opposite with a gunslinger.
And I think Josh Downs has his value too, but it's like
he's good.
Not that
he's
right
not
area.
In the right situation.
And Downs goes 2 rounds ahead of that. That's the key here. Where I'm not saying we're not investing in wide receivers. These are just guys round 10 or later. The next one I have on here is Khalil Shakir. Again, what part of the Buffalo offense are we investing in? Obviously Curtis Samuel is there. Dalton Kincaid's going to be the man. No doubt about it. I think Keon Coleman jumps in here. But if you look at it, Khalil Shakir right now is going as the wide receiver 59 in Dynasty. I want as many pieces of the Buffalo offense as possible because you and I did a podcast the other week on ambiguous running back situations. This is the premier ambiguous wide receiver situation. You can see a path that Khalil Shakir, Keon Coleman could really rise in value, and Curtis Samuel could be a nice producer. Buffalo is where I want to be invested. He emerged last year as a legit second option in this offense in year 2, hauled in 39 of 45 targets, so he's very reliable for Josh Allen. You look at the 2 games that Gabe Davis missed last year, 10 for 75 and 2 touchdowns. So he stepped up when Gabe Davis was out. And I think right now, I think it's going to be him and Keon on the outside. And I think he actually really is going to be the apple of Josh Allen's eye, not Curtis Samuel. But either one, I'm investing in Shakir because he's younger and gives you upside.
Yeah, he's someone that I would just rather so many other guys in this area. Like I'm looking at just kind of like a consensus list, like Palmer, Javon Baker, Quentin Johnston, Jerry Jeudy, like D-Hop, Troy Franklin, like all these guys. I'm personally not on the Khalil Shakir wave, but I see the path for that. I just think, I mean, Kurt Sam and his injuries is kind of intriguing for Khalil Shakir.
He's dirt cheap. So
they're really the same type of player, but
Palmer and Samuel, I'm with you. Are if you're a veteran team, because you look at Palmer's going to be 25, Curtis Samuel's going to be 28. They're going wide receiver 68 and 69 back to back in that same area as Gabe Davis, Jalen McMillan, Rashad Bateman. Yeah, for sure. Sign me up. Like these guys are veterans. But if Curtis Samuel has 1,000 yards, how much more value is he going to gain? Because he'll be 28 years old and has been a kind of a journeyman. You know what I mean? Where I'm investing here, where if Shakir puts up 1,000 yards, all right, now all of a sudden he goes from wide receiver 59 to wide receiver 40. I feel like that's in that realm of possibilities, and that's what I'm looking for a building block, is a guy that I can take and then I can flip. Because I think the minute I can get a second for him, he's gone. right? And I think that's a mentality that I want to talk to you about. Is we talk a lot about process over results. This is not someone that we invested a lot of draft capital in. If week 1 he goes out and has 6 catches for 70 yards and 2 touchdowns, all right, let's sell him. You know what I mean? Like every now and then you're going to miss because you're going to sell early on a Puka Nacua. That is the 1 out of 1,000, as opposed to you take your Khalil Shakir, he has a big game, and you give Shakir in a second for a first, or Shakir for a second, or Shakir in a third for 2 seconds, and all of a sudden you've instantly made money. And that's what we're trying to do, is small wins. Because when you talk about building blocks in rounds 10 to 20, if you can take this and keep piling on top of each other, to now all of a sudden you turn Khalil Shakir and a couple other bench players into, Mike Evans on a contender. You turn them into, a guy like DJ Moore, a guy like, JSN, Jordan Addison. You're still building yourself up. Now your team's worth more. It has more longevity and it has more upside.
Exactly. Yeah. Good points there. I like that.
Oh, yo. All right. You were on that one. I love it. The third one I have, and I don't love the scenario. We talked about him, on our last show, about one of the most traded assets. Jahan Dotson is the wide receiver 55. So he hits, you look at his rookie year, 75% snaps in 7 games. During those 7 games, he had 5 top 20 wide receiver finishes. A lot of touchdowns. I mean, I feel like he scored 5 touchdowns in the first 5 games. Dotson flashed as a rookie, but then he struggled with Sam Howell. He struggled mightily with injuries. He was just up and down.
He was honestly just really good with Carson Wentz. Like Carson Wentz was feeding him.
But now, they obviously get Jaden Daniels, who's going to throw. He throws a great deep ball. I think I'm comfortably drafting him right now. He's going in the area of Jerry Jeudy, Nick Chubb, Zach Charbonnet, like Raheem Mostert in drafts. And I think there's a real world scenario where he rises in value. I'm only investing because I do think there's a scenario in season where he has one of these multiple touchdown games. And I say, Dotson in a second for a first, let's do it. And even if it's the 112, you win. Because next year's class is going to be great. And I think you get the 112 next year, and all of a sudden that becomes, Ibukwa, or like one of these quarterbacks that starts to pan out, and that's just a better process to reset the clock, right? Because Jahan Dotson, even if he puts up 1,500 yards this year, is not going to be worth a first. But if you can flip it for, 1,500 is pretty. 1,500 is pretty crazy.
1,500.
You understand what I'm saying? Is like, even if he balls out this year, there's a really low percentage that he would be worth a first. But if you can flip him for a first, now all of a sudden you look at what we were able to get last year at the late first with Devon Achane and Sam Laporta and Will Levis, and those all went up in value. And next year, we start to look at those guys that go 110 to 112. Once you get those first, Snoog, you reset the clock. You use these small building blocks to buy an asset where in the past, Josh Allen has gone for a late first. Justin Herbert has gone for a late first. Like these are guys that right now are early first startup picks or late second startup picks. So, I mean, you're working those building blocks to turn them into something that could pay out much more.
Exactly. Yeah. That's what it comes down to, is if you could flip these assets when they flash any sort of, we're giving you just players that can give you that flash at some point in the year, that have the quarterback, that have the target opportunity, that have a little bit of talent there. Because we're trying to build something here. That's the whole point of the show, is building blocks, is we're trying to work our way up. I've turned like seconds into early firsts by just building and building and adding and adding.
Even
that's how I
second for Dotson.
Yeah.
I mean, you turn that into a second last year, and some of those guys that went in the second round. I mean, Tajay Spears is worth more than that. Sam Laporta was going in the second sometimes. Like you turn those seconds, you get another opportunity to scratch off another lottery ticket. That's why I'm drafting him. I mean, do I like Rashid Shaheed? Yeah, but he's going to be 26. Do I like Cortland Sutton? Yeah, he's going to be 29. Jacoby Myers, 28. Those aren't lottery tickets anymore. Those are guys that you fill in your lineup when you have 3 injuries. Where taking a guy like Dotson, or the next guy, Jermain Burton, who's going in that same area as wide receiver 58. We saw last year that the ghost of Tyler Boyd had 98 targets and almost 700 yards when Joe Burrow wasn't healthy, or Joe Burrow was out of the lineup. And Tyler Boyd still, 98 targets for a wide receiver 3 in an offense. I'll take that opportunity wherever I can with a healthy Joe Burrow, because Burton has big play capabilities. If he didn't have questionable character, I think he goes considerably higher in the NFL draft.
Yep.
Higgins is on the franchise tag right now, which means he could be the wide receiver 2 on this team sooner than later. Higgins could, get injured and decide to not rush back. He could, and there's so many paths in 2024 where he could be the wide receiver 2. I think he's definitely the wide receiver 2 in Cincinnati next year, and his value is going to skyrocket if we get some injuries or if we get some opportunities. I'm comfortably drafting him over Zach Moss, Luke Musgrave. In a startup, I'd take him over Austin Eckler as much as I love him. I think he's going in that same area. Wide receiver 58, tons of upside. And Snoop, there's a real world scenario where if Jamar Chase goes down, if T. Higgins goes down, again, you could take Burton in a second and get a first real quickly.
Yeah, exactly. If it's going to come down to the target opportunity for Burton, but we know he's in a system where he can get that volume and that target opportunity regardless because he's playing with such a high-level quarterback and a high-powered offense. So,
is there any other wide receiver 3 who got 98 targets? That feels like that's pretty darn high.
JSN, right?
Yeah, he had 93. So no, Boyd had more. But I mean, it's got to be a pass-happy offense. And again, we keep talking about this, right? Top 5 offense with a top 5 quarterback. This is a dream.
Yeah, it's honestly insane that Jermain Burton got drafted there. I wish it was Javon Baker, but hey, Javon Baker got a good situation too. I'm all for that situation.
And again, you're looking at him, he goes wide receiver. He's at wide receiver 58. The guys right around here. I mean, they're all rookies, and I kind of like all 3 of these guys, Burton, Wilson, and Franklin. We're going to talk about them more. They go in that 50 range, but they're going slightly above. Like I said, Sutton, Malachi Corley, Javon Baker, talk about Baker too as well, Marvin Mims, Demario Douglas. I feel like there's some serious upside there with Jermain Burton in the right offense. The next one, and we just alluded to him, but number 5 is Troy Franklin. Troy Franklin is going off as wide receiver 52. If you told me, he was supposed to go maybe round 1, early round 2, slipped all the way to round 4. I think the Bo Nix and Franklin together gives him massive upside. Last year you look at in college, only 3 players had 100 plus targets, 80 plus receptions, 14 plus touchdowns, 400 plus yak, and 3.4 yards per route run. Do you know who those 3 wide receivers are? Marvin Harrison Jr., Malik Neighbors, and Troy Franklin. I mean, Troy Franklin has incredible upside, incredible opportunity, horrible quarterback play, probably, bottom 3 offense. And this is the difference between him and Burton, right? The only reason that they're close right now is that Burton's with Cincinnati. He's with Denver. So would you rather have the wide receiver 3 in Cincinnati or the wide receiver 1A, 1B in Denver? That's kind of where you're at here with this. But talk to me a little bit about Troy Franklin.
Yeah, he's the guy that I kind of always had a feeling that the NFL was going to be lower on him than everyone in the fantasy community was.
Him and Coleman, right?
Yeah, that's why I kind of always had Troy Franklin below Worthy and Thomas. I just thought they were much better pros and better NFL prospects than Franklin was. But I mean, the analytics were through the roof. He's a good player. He wins downfield well. He's paired up with his college quarterback. I think Snoog and Data running routes for the Denver Broncos, so he doesn't have much target opportunity there at all. So I think Troy Franklin's another one of those guys. I'm gonna put together kind of 2. We'll do a little one-off after this later on. I'll probably put something out on Twitter of a couple more names that I like that fit this mold as well, just to add on. Because the whole point of it is just addressing and identifying the 3 things we're looking for in one of these wide receivers. There's a bunch that you can add. Just buy them all. If I sat here and told you that this guy was going to break out and you're wrong and there's nobody else that has a chance, I'd look like a fool because nobody knows. There's literally 15 candidates that could be there.
Yeah.
And but I can tell you one thing, there will be a couple. So that's the thing.
I do this every year, and for every Sky Moore and Treylon Burks, there's always a guy that pops off. You know what I mean? For every time there's those guys, there's Jaden Reeds. For every time there's, into that area, there's a Josh Downs. There's a, these are lottery tickets. You're not investing high draft capital. You're just getting them. You want to scratch it off. You want to kind of move yourself up into that next tier and kind of get yourself there. And I think Snoog, again, on a rebuilding team, I mean, if I came to you and you had Addison, would you give me Franklin in a first for Addison?
I'd take Franklin's side.
And I think that's a real world scenario you can do. I mean, we saw, I think, if you're rebuilding and you can get DK Metcalf in a mid first, You start to look at these guys that are worth slightly more than a mid-first right now, and that's DK Metcalf, Devonta Smith, Jordan Addison, T. Higgins. Those are the guys where if I can get a first plus a Franklin, a first plus a Burton, and if I'm completely rebuilding, you know what I mean? If I'm in that area, now all of a sudden Burton goes up in value, Franklin goes up in value. That pick we know is going to go up in value, and there is a 0% chance that DK Metcalf goes up in value because he'll be 27 years old. And I think Devontae could a little bit, but you understand the scenarios. You're kind of moving there and almost looking more, even in the end of this year's draft. I mean, I've seen people trade Brian Thomas, Xavier Worthy, Lad McConkey for a random 25 first in Franklin. I mean, in that scenario, would you rather take a shot on the first and Franklin, or would you rather take a shot on those three prospects?
I think I'd rather take a shot on those three prospects.
It's close. It's close. And that's where I'm intrigued by that on rebuilding teams. I'm trying to, reset the clock. This one's a little bit deeper for me. It's wide receiver 73, Marvin Mims. So again, with Franklin, I wanted to put these two guys together. Tremendous upside meets opportunity for Mims with his deep ball opportunities. You look at his first 4 games that he played as a rookie, 242 yards with 3 touchdowns. It's boom potential. Not a lot on the resume, though. I think Nix is going to favor Franklin. He's going to go with Sutton. But I think Mims is going to have a couple pop-off games. And just like what we've been talking about, if Mims goes out and he gets a multiple touchdown game, you flip him in a third for a second. You don't always have to go for a first. Sometimes we're just trying to make small wins. Right now, he's worth a third. I see a real-world scenario where he is either worth a second or nothing next year. It's like Treylon Burks, right? Treylon Burks last year was either going to get himself moved up where he's going to increase in value or be worth squat. And Marvin Mims is in that area now too. But at wide receiver 73, Snoog, I mean, now we're talking, so you have your choice of, let's see where we're at. Wan'Dale Robinson, Jalen Hyatt, Mike Williams, Darnell Mooney. Are those guys going to go up in value? Probably not. There's a bunch of wild cards. Pick your poison. And it doesn't have to be Marvin Mims. Some people like Jalen Hyatt. Some people like Luke McCaffrey. Some people like Brendan Rice. You pick your guy. But we're just trying to talk about make sure they're in an elite offense or make sure they're getting opportunity. And if they do, be ready to flip them.
Yeah, exactly. Marvin Mims is a guy I liked a lot as a prospect coming out. I mean, 2nd round pick. Sean Payton becomes the head coach and they draft him. They trade up and get him. It almost seems like that they were really about him. And then he barely played, which was really weird. But I think that room, there's going to be someone. Someone's got to lead that room in targets. And it's going to probably be Troy or Mims. Sutton's still there, but I think one of those two is going to gain value. One of those two will gain value, and it's just
what area.
Whoever.
What area you're drafting? Are you drafting in the 13th or the 17th? You know what I mean? That's kind of where you go. A couple other guys, I got Michael Wilson going right now as wide receiver 70. He showed some flashes, showed some promise. I think the Zay Jones signing probably cuts him down a little bit for upside, but the community in a whole seems to really like Michael Wilson. There were guys before they took Marv that were trading seconds for him. And I think, again, a real world scenario, he's tied to an elite quarterback, an offense that's going to put up points. He puts up multiple touchdowns, flip him in a third for a second, get yourself back into that area. And I think there's a lot of guys in that 70 range. I mean, Demario Douglas. I think anybody you go in that New England completely ambiguous wide receiver room, right? I personally like Jalen Polk the most. I know you like Baker the most. Demario Douglas. Pick your poison, but one of them is going to go up in value.
I think Polk and Baker are both really good players to invest in. They got the quarterback play. They both have clear target opportunity. They have a long-term outlook. Not really any young guys behind them that are really talented, other than Pop Douglas, who's not some superstar wide receiver.
Dude, he has a following on Twitter where people will go off on you if you don't list Pop Douglas in there. It's crazy.
It's funny. But yeah, so that's why I think Baker and Polk, they were good talents. They both produced at a high level in college. They were good analytically. They have great hands. They have a good route tree, and they're tied to a really good young up-and-coming quarterback. So I think that's a scenario where you can make those small bets and get a big payout in return. So those are two guys that I would definitely add top of this list for me. Quentin Johnston's another guy I would throw in there.
Hey, you jumped me. That's number 8. Dude, how many wide receivers have gone round 1 in the NFL draft and then round 1 in a super flex rookie draft. And then by the next year, they're barely worth a second. You know, like even when Jalen Reagor, who was just hot garbage, like literally, and with less upside, he was still worth more than what Quentin Johnston was right now. And I think at wide receiver 62, and they didn't really address the wide receiver position much outside Ladd McConkey, who plays completely different than Quentin Johnston. And I have drafted him. I did 4 startups so far this offseason, and I have taken Quentin Johnston in every single one because it's just a complete lottery pick. You know, it's just a lottery ticket where, yeah, it might be partially scratched off Snoog, but when you do those lottery tickets like I used to do with my grandma all the time, get the quarter out, scratch it up, even to that last one, you're like, I could still win something, you know? Like you go the whole way out there, and Quentin Johnston really, compared to everybody else in that range, you know, okay, if I just think at 22 years old, we haven't seen what his potential is. Could be in a Treylon Burks scenario by next year, but I'd rather have him because he's a little bit younger.
Yeah, I like Quentin Johnston still. I think people are just so out on him just because like they saw those drops by him, but like
yeah,
he's not like that bad, and he has a wide open receiving room with an elite quarterback in an offense that has a whole new coaching staff now, so they have people that know how to use him. Hopefully, just better than they did last year.
Let me tell you the round.
He was always a little bit of a project, and we all knew that he was going to need some development because he was raw coming out. But I mean, first round pick tied to an elite quarterback in a room with at least he's the wide receiver 3 behind Palmer and Ladd. I think it's just, I mean, like he's priced with like 5th and 6th round picks that'll probably never be anything. Yeah. Just give me Quentin Johnston there.
He could be a poor man's DK Metcalf and catch 10 touchdowns this year. I would not. But listen to round 15, okay? I took him at the end of round 15 behind Mims, Howell, Michael Wilson, Michael Mayer, Zeke, Hopkins, Kraft, Devin Singletary, Raheem Mostert, and Kamani Vidal. How many of those guys are going to go up in value? Like can legitimately. Vidal could, but I mean like Devin Singletary, I understand whatever your build is, but like Quentin Johnston could rise exponentially in value with where he's at. Will he have that like negative connotation from his rookie year that it's harder to flip him? Absolutely. But I mean, I think you could get him plus a second for Jameson Williams in a third at this point. And Jamo's already shown the same kind of thing where it's just like struggling to stay on the field or struggling to produce. So I know it's a wild card. I do get it. But it's a lottery ticket. That's what we're talking about, is guys taken in this rounds as wide receivers. Really, that's probably the end of the line for me. Maybe a Luke McCaffrey because he got 2nd round draft capital. You know, I'm not really investing in a Devontae Walker. Wan'Dale Robinson is just showing a little bit here and there. But the idea of this,
a good one though.
Yeah, him and Rondale
could be
Moore
a decent value.
They're guys that I think. Would you ever feel comfortable with Wan'Dale Robinson as your wide receiver 2 or 3 starting regularly?
Absolutely not.
No.
But a bench player.
Yeah. So what we're trying to do, and I look at teams I want to talk about this a little bit because guys send me rosters all the time in the Patreon, and they say, "What do you think of this?" And I'm like, "You have too much random depth. Like they'll have 7 guys that are worth a second. They'll have they'll have Dobbs and Downs and Baker and like." A whole team of that on their bench. And I'm like, it's time to start moving. If you can give Judy in a third for a second, you go do it. If you can give Michael Wilson in a third for a second, you go do it. If you can give Christian Watson in a second for a first, you go do it. You make these moves because how many people in your league want Christian Watson? Probably about 4. How many guys in your league want a first? 12. You know, like you start to get those areas where you start to build up and you make small advancements and then you get yourself up to, you know what? I just got Christian Watson now in season. Jackson Smith and Jigba. I trade Watson in a third for Njigba because Watson had 2 good games. Then I take Njigba in a second and I pair him for Roma Dunze because, Roma Dunze, JSN had a good game. You know what I mean? Then you get yourself to an area where now we've gone from building blocks of Michael Wilson to Christian Watson to Jackson Smith and Jigba, to Roma Dunze, and you just keep building yourself up. So now all of a sudden we get to 2025 and you have an extra first and you draft Ollie Gordon because you don't have to worry about a wide receiver because the wide receiver rooms are filled.
Exactly. Yeah, Ollie Gordon. I mean, dude, turning anything into first, like firsts are always the best asset you can own in fantasy football, especially
It's crazy, Snoop, because a 25 first right now is worth a 5th or 6th round startup pick. Okay?
Yeah.
So a 5th or 6th round startup pick right now, that is DK Metcalf, Zay Flowers, T. Higgins, Michael Pittman, right? But there is a real world scenario where you take Dontavion Wicks in a second and you buy a first, or Jalen Polk in a second and you buy a first, or, you know, one of these guys that we're talking about, and you build yourself into that spot where now you have a pick that has at least is going to be worth a 5th next year. That
And
could
Zay
be worth
Flowers or something.
way higher. Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah. And I think that's how Dynasty is won, and people don't like to think about it. They want to talk about those sexy trades where they traded, you know, Jamar Chase for Garrett Wilson, a first, and something else. And those are great too. But those small trades turn into big trades sometime. I know you do it all the time. I'm always trying to like look at this from a math standpoint, trying to look at it of like what percentage chance do I have to hit with Jermain Burton versus what percentage chance when I add a second to Jermain Burton when I'm contending that I get Mike Evans, he's going to win me money, or I get to, you know, Keon Coleman somehow. Like, make these small adjustments. It drives me nuts when I look at rosters that have 10 wide receivers like this. If you look at all my rosters, it is 4 starting wide receiver caliber guys, 1 or 2 bench depths like you talked about with a Calvin Ridley, a Hollywood Brown, a Deontay Johnson. I just cracked like a teenager. A Christian Kirk, you know, like even down to, you know, a DeAndre Hopkins or something like that. And then I have I might have one of these lottery guys like a Khalil Shakir, and then I'll have 8 running backs. Because guess what? Ty Chandler will probably be worth more than one of these guys in season because he's going to start. You know what I mean? And like running backs, like you can see a scenario where Jerome Ford, Zach Charbonnet, Marshawn Lloyd, they get a starting gig. You know, they start Jalen Wright, these Chase Brown, they're going to be instantly worth more than these wide receivers. So you want to load up as many running backs as possible.
Exactly. And a lot of people always ask me, like, I'll show off some teams and stuff, and people are like, dude, how do you build these super teams? And it's like, because I hit on the Mike Williams, the Deebo Samuels, the Ramondre Stevenson and Tony Pollard's of 2022. I know whoever is listening, you cash your bets. I talked running backs, but I just had to say it because it happens across all positions, right?
Yeah.
Like you had your Jordan Loves and your Brock Purdy's last year. You had all these wide receivers. You had Deontay Johnson, who flashed as a rookie, who was pretty solid, and then blew up after that in year 2 and year 3. It happens all the time. These year 1, these year 2, these year 3 breakouts in these rookies. 2nd round, 3rd round, 4th round, 5th round picks. It doesn't matter as long as the path is there, the talent's there, and the opportunity for targets is there. And this is how you build true super teams. Like, you got to build your roster onside of that bench. And then once you hit on those players, now it's like, damn, like I didn't know I just hit on Ramondre and Tony Pollard. Now I can turn them into Travis Etienne. And now you have like this bona fide top 5 to 6 dynasty RB1. And then you hit on like that Deebo Samuel of that 2021 year, and he's a top 5 to 12 dynasty wide receiver at the time, and you turn him into Garrett Wilson plus. It's a wheel. You just gotta stay atop and stay ahead of the curve, and just buy talent. Like avoid the Darnell Mooney's, the Elijah Moores, like those type of guys that like aren't as decent. Talented, that they flash, but you're like that they'll never be a top 10 dynasty wide receiver.
Elijah Moore was. You got to know when to flip them. We always talk about tiering down, which is great, which is the reverse process of this, because we're talking about where you trade, you know, you trade this guy plus this guy for a first, and this guy plus this guy for a second. But sometimes it's small wins where in season, Snook, there's going to be a scenario where you can trade Zach Moss and one of these guys to upgrade, and you can trade Ezekiel Elliott, you know, and those are Gus Edwards, Zach Moss, Ezekiel Elliott, are guys that are ticking time bombs on your roster. You know, they're gonna get Devin Singletary. They're gonna give you production, but when they stop, they're worthless. You know what I mean? So like if you have 6 of these running backs and Gus Edwards has a 2 touchdown game, then you add him to Polk to get up to, you know, Purcell, you do it. Or you keep moving yourself up, make these small wins, get yourself more liquid, more firsts, less mitigate risk, maximize opportunity. That's the easy way to win. And people don't get it. And we talk about it all the time with guys in the Patreon. My favorite part of the Patreon is when guys are answering questions in the group to themselves, where it's like, oh no, Snook, I heard Snook say this. I heard Dad say this. This is how you win in these scenarios. And they start to adapt to some of those, you know, insulated trades and do those tendencies. And then all of a sudden it's like, all right, anybody can take advice and just say, hey, this is how it's done. But we're trying to give you advice that's something that is teachable, so you guys keep moving, right? So then when you do your next draft, you do your next trade, you win those. So yeah, this was fun. Just trying to talk about how to build up. If you guys have questions, you can always find me at Dynasty@FF or at FF Snoog. Check us out on YouTube. Make sure you guys hit that smash subscribe button. Thanks again for tuning in. Enjoy the process. Yo, it's Pink Polo Day. Let's do it. Mine's a little bit more peachy.